Welcome to DC Local Leaders, the podcast where we talk to C-suite leaders within the DC area. Our guests share their pathways to success and the important moments that impacted their careers. Lean in as we get the inside scoop on how they are shaping their industries, how they lead, manage, and connect with others. From the sectors of aerospace, defense, tech, IT, and more, this is Local Leaders. Your host has been making meaningful connections with industry leaders for over 15 years. Here's Philip Nathram.
All right, welcome back. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm your host, Philip Nathram. This is the DC Local Leaders podcast. We are back with another episode. This episode is with Mike McDermott. Mike is the president of InquisIT. That's InquisIT. You may have seen their logo with the capital IT on the end of the word. They're based right here in Ballston, and Mike just has an incredible journey from going from the United States Marine Corps as a young person in his 20s to finding himself very quickly in a leadership role of other people and then carrying that forward throughout his career. He's led two other companies prior to his appointment as president at InquisIT, and he also has a number of different personal ventures that he's working on that he shares with us as well. Throughout that time, he's learned a lesson of understanding that things are both and not necessarily either or, and he has created this accountability as a culture within InquisIT, and he just gives us so much knowledge based on his experience. So I'm really excited to bring you this episode, and thank you so much to everyone who has rated, reviewed, subscribed, and followed us on Instagram, Spotify, Apple, all of the media outlets that we're on. And thank you so much to everyone who's reached out through email with your suggestions. Really appreciate that. We want to bring you quality content, and we need that feedback in order to do so. So let's get right into the episode. How you doing, Mike?
Good. And I appreciate your flexibility this morning.
Yeah.
I know not everybody gets all the background stuff, so you showed up, and we're in the middle of our furniture installation, our first day in the new building here. A little too much background noise to run a podcast, so we've already had the building manager chasing us down because we took over the conference center.
Yeah, I know, but it's been exciting and it's been fun. Mike McDermott, you are the president of InquisIT LLC. We're here today in your office in Ballston, your brand new office.
Yep.
As we were just talking about. And yeah, I'm excited to have you on board with another podcast here. Tell me a little bit about InquisIT. What do you guys do? I know you're GovCon, but what does that mean?
Yep, sure. So we're an IT company within the federal space. A lot of infrastructure, cyber, software support. We consult with CTOs, CIOs, and on various things where they're trying to push the envelope in areas of technology and things like that. The big thing that really separates the company is we're kind of a commercial firm that started doing government contracting work, if you will. So there's a legacy to the firm, but really over the last couple of years in taking it over, the ethos of the firm is the kind of more commercial. What I mean by that is, one of the things in our culture is earn your customer's business every day, and that's an unusual kind of ethos within the federal space where it's one of the really unique industries where you can earn these contracts that are worth millions and millions of dollars and impact millions of people, and you carry them on for generally about 5 years at a time. And with that kind of market, I've seen in my time in the market a little bit of a complacency that kind of sets in. You feel like you have leverage in negotiation with your customer because they're not going to get rid of you, that kind of thing. And I really want to see, and I believe the taxpayer deserves to kind of see some of that really broken down. And for federal contractors to remember they're spending the taxpayers' money, they impact the lives of a lot of people, which sometimes in the Beltway, people get a little bit lost. And that means when you go in and you're supporting that customer mission, you've got to earn their business every day.
Yeah. How long have you been a part of InquisIT and in the role that you're in?
Yeah, sure. I got brought in, I think it's a little over 4 years ago now. I had known the owners for at least a decade before that. I had worked with them, and they were actually a subcontractor of mine when I was over at Facile. And then they were a client of mine, and it was kind of a funny story coming in. At the time, I had offers from a couple of other firms to come in and start, take a CEO or, C-level type of position. And most of them were turnaround type of things or businesses that had stagnated in some way and needed a lift. And I kind of got love that space. That space intrigues me in addition to the startup space. So I was sitting down with them, and I was telling the owners, I don't know that I'm your guy as a consultant anymore, because I really want to go take something on a little bit more of a full-time role. And they were a bit insulted that I hadn't come to them and told them I wanted the full-time role. And I told them, pretty clearly that the culture of the firm, while there are elements of it that were incredibly comfortable, I fit, if you will, in with a lot of those guys really well, that there were other elements of the culture, and it was more of a lifestyle business that didn't really align with my personal goals, and it really didn't make sense. And of course, they went, lifestyle business? What do you mean? People get very insulted by that sometimes, and it's not a bad thing. It's a very different way of running a company, and for different purpose. And so after a couple months of, just kind of talking through what they really wanted and what that actually meant, it made sense to come on, and we cut a deal. And actually, we're now just in the infant processes of executing a management buyout with the new management team buying out the owners.
There's so much there. You mentioned a lot of buzzwords that we love here on the DC Local Leaders podcast. First one I heard was culture. I want to get into a little bit about what the culture is actually here at InquisIT and how you've shaped that. And really just dig in, like, how did you get to where you are, like, and all that. But what is a lifestyle company? Like, what does that mean when you said that?
General terminology is kind of lifestyle business is a business you're not necessarily looking to grow rapidly and sell and have a private jet and be part owner of a football team kind of thing.
Right.
You want to be home for dinner. You want to make the kids' soccer games, but you also want to have ownership of something, and you want to have the monetary freedom that comes with being in an ownership role without maybe going kind of what others might consider over the top.
Right.
And my dad is a great example. He started a business at 52, and every year he fires some customers. And he does that because in his mind, they, for various reasons, kind of make bad customers, or the money is not as good as some of the others, and he wants to keep his business at a manageable size for him and what he wants to do at his age. And he's very open about it. And I think that that's a very healthy way to do it. And then there's another side of folks like myself who really enjoy the process of trying to create that hockey stick growth and getting into the merger and acquisition community and things like that.
Yeah, so when you say lifestyle company, you mean specifically you can still maintain a work-life balance and have a lifestyle outside of just working all day long.
Which if you're really looking for high financial results, that is not that that's impossible by any stretch, but it becomes much more vexing problem spaces, and there's a little bit more, I think, that you end up having to give up.
To get that
Yes.
monetary gain.
Yeah, absolutely.
And taking that with the culture of InquisIT, right? What would you say the culture of InquisIT is?
So I'm going to kind of give some context, because I think understanding what it's like to come into a business and then have to modify its culture is its own kind of animal. And what I mean by that is when you come into an organization, you're a guest. Even if you're hired to be the president or the CEO, you have to earn your way into the hearts of everybody in the organization, which means that you can't come in and just put your culture onto everybody. You're a guest in their house, and you've got to become part of that culture and understand that culture and what all of the important stories are to everybody and what the important things mean. And then you can, once you're accepted, begin the discussion about, hey guys, there's some really good stuff here, but there's some stuff we might want to talk about. And there's some stuff here that might be holding you back a little bit. And that's where, I focused when I came into the organization. And at one point, it was, I needed a way to start the discussion. And I also needed a way to make everybody believe that while there were challenging changes ahead, they had it in them to make that. And so what I decided to do was sit down and write what we have today, and is the InquisIT Credo, which is to document everything. And there's nothing in there that is abrasive within the organization. So for example, being responsive, being available as a manager or a leader 24/7 to your folks and your customers, earning your customers' business every day, being transparent and truthful even when it's really difficult. Those kind of things become really important to the institution. And the other thing is they have two other aspects. One is they begin to take away a lot of the discussions around you don't like me, or this was a favored person, or those types of things that people very naturally fall into those tendencies.
The office politics.
And you go, yeah. And so part of the kind of the trick to keeping them out, if you will, is if your culture is documented, it's someplace, it's however you choose in the organization to do that, then you can, when that stuff starts to come up, say, no, it's not a me and you thing. We as an organization have agreed to live by this credo. And I don't think you're consistent with this piece, so let's explore that. It's not a me versus you. It's this is what I've seen in your behavior, and let's have a discussion. And it's relative to something that's outside of both of you. So it makes that process a bit easier.
Have you seen that received well from the employees?
Oh, yeah.
They appreciate that?
Yep, and we talk about in performance reviews and things like that, upholding the culture is a major piece of it. And then for the folks that really stand out and do things through the year, we have different awards and things like that at the end of the year that we do, which are really fun. The other complexity about building a culture within the federal space specifically is really the fact that you put your people to work at other people's organizations that also have their own culture. So, I want to build my own strong culture at InquisIT that's going to yield a certain financial results, and it's going to yield a certain quality results, and it's going to yield a mission accomplishment results, and there's all of these different pieces. Well, that culture can't conflict with our customers, USDA, Export-Import Bank, in the Navy, and they've all got their own cultures. So really understanding what some of the cornerstone things that are important across the federal space and not making sure that you are not in conflict with those things was also part of putting that culture down. And what ends up is you kind of strip things down to, kind of that bare metal, that foundation of the organization, and get to really simple concepts like transparency and honesty and like working hard and all those kind of things that as simple and straightforward as they conceptually seem can yield really interesting conversations. So what if we ask you to work over a weekend? And if you decide not to because you have a kid's game, are you not working hard?
Right.
That becomes a conversation.
Are those two things synonymous?
Exactly. Exactly. So being able to kind of work through a lot of that stuff's important.
Yeah, I think a lot of times we lose that in a lot of companies, and I don't know if it's relative to size or what. How many employees do you guys have at?
A little over 100.
Yeah. So you've got a significant number of people, and to be able to maintain that culture with all of those people, and that idea that. It sounds like there's a support system, and you're setting reasonable expectations out in front, and you're setting that you care about them as an individual, right? Because everything that you mentioned are great ways to just operate your life in general, right?
Yeah, I think business isn't unlike, I was an athlete. I used a lot of sports metaphors,
so
a lot of guys do, but it really translates into so many walks of life.
Yeah, you get out what you put in, and that sort of thing, and. So how did you get involved with this type of work? You mentioned your dad was a business owner. Like, where'd you start? Did you, go to school, military?
I am the least qualified person in the entire firm to be working in the position I'm working. And, I tell a lot of our guys that the reason I have to be the president of the company is really due to the fact that I'm really not qualified to do anything else. There's not really a job description. It's a bit of a long story. So I was recruited out of high school to play soccer. And in my first semester, I had a pretty good injury and could not make that leap athletically, especially after an injury. So I decided if I can't be a college athlete, the next best place for me was the U.S. Marine Corps. And I ended up in the Marine Corps in a signal intelligence role primarily, and then working in a couple of different jobs throughout the intel community. and getting a really, really, really good base in a lot of different types of technology, various types of collection methods and different things like that, as well as cybersecurity, kind of before it was cool. And that led me pretty quickly into a contracting job at Titan Systems. So this is going back, almost 20 years, I guess. Titan Systems at that point was going through an acquisition of a small company, and I really didn't understand what was going on. But I had gotten put on this contract where the organization had had the contract for a year and a half. It was a training contract where they basically were setting up a classroom to train the Marines on how to integrate a lot of the tactical systems, as well as keep track of a common operating picture and movement of enemy assets and things like that via electronic boards. And so this was on the heels of coming up with the internet. This is 2002.
Yeah, that was Hotmail time.
Yeah,
that was when
it was like really cutting edge stuff.
Yeah.
At the time.
That was dial-up. That was like.
Oh, when we were all high speed satellite vans, and
what you guys were.
We were setting Track 170s, 85, Mark 132s. So I worked on all those types of things. There was no contract started though. There was no actual classroom where they were training the Marines. So my boss, who is in Virginia Beach, comes down to Camp Lejeune to visit me, and he said, "Oh, don't worry about it. We'll have this. We'll have that. We'll have this." And I'm looking at him, and I'm like, "Well, why can't I do this?" And so I said, "How about if I get you this classroom, which nobody else has been able to do for a year and a half, you promote me to be the program manager?" And he kind of laughed at me, and it kind of got me. And so I said, "Okay, let's shake on it." And I want a $5,000 raise. Like, that was huge money to me at the time. And he shook on it, and within less than 30 days, I managed to get my hands on 22 tactical computer systems, all freshly boxed, an internet line, a router, a couple of other peripheral things, and a server that we could actually run a whole bunch of things off of. And I said, "Okay, now you can come back down from Virginia Beach and give me my raise and promote me."
Yeah.
And so he came down. I could see the look on his face. It was not pride. It was, it happened.
Yeah.
So he sat me down and he said, "This was valiant. Like, this is amazing, but let me explain to you the way government contracting works. Is you're actually not qualified to be the program manager." To which, at the time, I'm 21, 22 years old. Nobody else could do this in a year and a half. I did it, and now you're going to tell me I'm not qualified to do the job? I did the job.
Right. It's already done.
So I called the government customer, and I said, "Hey, you need to fix this." And that was a big no-no, of course, as anybody knows. I was, like I said, a little bit of an aggressive kind of dumb kid. And so I made program manager. And so now I'm this kid who's in a company that just got acquired and into Titan Systems. And it was during that time that I saw the industry for, I think, a little bit of what it is, which was, I was in a hotel in a conference room with probably 50 white guys in their 50s and, who all could be my dad. And they all kind of dressed the same. They all kind of looked the same. They all kind of talked the same. And I didn't really see anybody pushing. I didn't see, and I was freshly out of the Marine Corps, and they weren't talking about the things that were important to me when I was wearing a uniform on a consistent basis. And then they're throwing up the numbers on the charts. And I'm thinking to myself, if these idiots can make that kind of money, I can get involved in this stuff and service these customers better. And I decided at that point I was going to kind of give up what at the time I thought I was going to be in federal law enforcement, and said, I think I can make a bigger impact here because I can actually touch more things. So it was at that point that I started to pursue a career kind of more on the federal contracting side, but with the target of either owning something, running something, getting to the executive ranks of someplace. Didn't really know what the path was going to be. I knew I needed to go someplace else, and I could get higher. So I actually got recalled very shortly after that.
What year was this?
This was in 2000, and this would have been 2002-3 time frame.
Okay.
So this is right in the invasion. I got recalled for the invasion. Got did a year of active duty. Mm-hmm. Got out again. Worked for NSA via CSC, and I got picked up to be one of the lead forensic cyber investigators for the blackout investigation of 2002. Mm. And so again, this was when cybersecurity wasn't what it is today, and guys at that point, I was one of the very unique, skilled people who, I had been through networking school. I had an MCSE. I had done a lot of Unix administration. I could program in Perl and C#, and I could do a lot of these things, and I could get myself around a system, and I could kind of figure out what was going on in there. But so I got picked up, and I spent a couple months on that project. And again, that was really, really, really cool. But during that same time frame, I had been pursued by Facil's owners who had actually turned me down for my first job there. And so in the process of going into a final interview and sitting there in a final interview, of which I was a half an hour late to the interview.
Were you so talk to me about your headspace and your self-talk on the way there, because you knew you were late, and I know.
Oh, and I was, and I'm not, I was not at that point in my life anywhere close to where I am now, relative to being able to kind of understand, yourself, in all honesty. And so I was just running through the Crystal City Underground, trying to find the hotel we were meeting at, which turns out wasn't even connected to the Underground. Just, nervous, sweaty, angry I couldn't find it. So I finally get to the hotel. They're meeting in the lobby. They're pretty understanding about me being late. I figure these guys are going to give me like 20 minutes and shoo me out of this place. There's no way I'm getting this job. So we finished with the interview, and the guy who is the CEO ended up working with very closely for the next 12 years, almost 12 years. He said, well, do you have any questions for me? And I said, yeah, I do. I said, if I come in to your organization, I'd like to do sales. And he goes, okay. And I said, and if I make you enough money, I want you to capitalize a business for me down the road. And he just kind of looks at me like we just met.
Yeah, which is crazy, right? But also, where did you get that idea? Like, had you seen that before? Did you? Because I don't know that if I were in that position, especially at that age, I don't know that I would think like that. Right? How did you?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I had prior to taking this interview and kind of during the job search timeframe and coming back off active duty, I actually had called Titan. And I said, hey, what I would like to do is come in and do, proposals and sales and learn that side of the business, because quite frankly, I want to know that I can do that, because if I'm going to run a business, I want to be able to do that in order to make sure that the business would sustain. I mean, it was critically clear to me that if you couldn't sell, you were never going to run a business successfully. And so that was, that one I knew. And they turned me down. They said, no, sorry, you don't have a college degree. You don't qualify for any of our positions internally. So you're a tech guy. Congratulations. Then when I went over to CFC, despite being the guy that actually won the proposal, and I wrote a lot of that proposal that ended up winning,
right.
It was the same thing. You don't have a degree, yada, yada. So after having those experiences in very large firms and kind of starting to become much more aware of the bureaucracy and the alphanumeric designation that identifies you in the organization, I started to decide, okay, this really isn't my cup of tea. I like to be small. I like to lead people. So I knew I needed to probably go start something on my own. It was either, to me, those were the two worlds that existed. It was either go work for a big company you can retire from, or go start something on your own. I was completely unaware of everything that existed in the middle. Okay. And so that's where that came from. Right?
And okay, so you'd been told no enough times to where you realized, look, I'm going to have to do this on my own.
Yep, and that looked like a good alternative.
Yeah. Well, that's great, man. Just hearing that story, and so from there, that you obviously got that. Did it work out?
So here's what's funny. So it did, and they were extremely gracious to myself and another VP at the time of the company who went out and started another firm and actually consulted back. I consulted back mostly on obviously the sales side. So I was essentially almost full-time type of work, and then had some contracts, mostly with Defense Logistics Agency, and had just had picked up a couple FTEs in security at NSA. And so shortly after doing that, they actually asked me to come back and run the firm. We had done pretty well. They wanted to team me up with another guy in the company who is a longtime friend of the CEO, who's Tom Shoemaker, and we ran that firm from 2009 to 2014. Average CAGR was 37% over those years. We took the business we took it over roughly $40 million. When I left the company, we had closed at $148 million.
Wow, almost $100 million more.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. And in a relatively short time. I mean, what is that?
Yeah,
5 years?
relatively short time, high EBITDA, did really well within the GWACs.
And what's GWACs?
The government-wide acquisition contract. So basically, the way that the government is really running the IT side now is the companies that are going to make the money are on the big contracts. Hence, that's why they spend so much time in court when they lose.
Right. So yeah, and that led you to InquisIT.
Yep, exactly.
You know, DC local leaders, we're all about mindset, leadership, the individual personal growth, the journey, the spiritual growth if it's there. I hear this message that you learned so much along the way, and you've been able to apply that every step of the way. And it sounds like, you know, your experience of being told no and then having to create a way of your own. You know, you learned a lot about the human condition, probably your own human condition, right? During that.
Oh yeah, big time. I mean, I was an executive, or at a kind of an executive level in my mid to late 20s. One of the things people ask is, you know, what would you tell yourself? And I don't know that I would really tell myself anything, because as much as I would have been a better leader if I slowed down and I asked more questions and I, you know, was more self-aware and things like that, I don't know that if I had all of that I would have had the right experiences to build me where I am today. And I think that the reality is you might give yourself some really fantastic advice of where you are today, but it doesn't mean you don't introduce yourself to new problems then.
Right.
And so, you know, but I'm sure I was a nightmare at times to work with, as you know, as I still can be, but much more frequently.
I believe that too. Like, I don't know that I would change. I can look backwards and say I wish this were different sometimes, but I don't know that I would be in the position that I'm in now had everything that did happen not happened.
And I think the reality is, you know, you learn your lessons the best when you skin the knees. You know, when you you literally have that skin in the game. You cannot. You know,
is that where that comes from?
I don't think that's where it comes from.
Oh,
but
like skin in the game.
It made sense.
Yeah, I was like, oh my god.
You know, I've got 4 daughters, and it's really interesting to kind of choose when you give them some level of advice, and when you kind of have to just ask questions, and when you just kind of have to go, all right, this is going to hurt. I'll be there on the other side. But they've got to feel the pain to learn the lesson.
Yeah, I mean, I was in a conversation with another guest, and we were talking about how we learn from our failures, probably more so than our successes, because, you know, a lot of times we don't even acknowledge the success, or it's just part of what we do, and we're not saying that we were successful. Maybe it's different in a business, right? Because if you win a contract, you probably do go back and say, all right, well, what worked well, and what can we replicate? I would think, right? But the exercise probably is always more valuable when you don't win that contract, right? Because then over time you can see patterns. Well, we're not doing this, hopefully.
Yeah, and actually it's funny, in our particular line of work, you really have to do that on your own. You don't get a lot of feedback from the government. Yeah. You really have to look for those patterns, and you know, what somebody might look at kind of a sabermetric approach, right? So, you know, how do we take all of the elements of what we do in a sales process or an ops process or everything and kind of break it down so we can begin to quantify things, and then we can actually study and measure some impact.
Yeah, and then even, you know, going back to your daughters and just anyone listening and just people in general, right? I'm a big human condition person, right? That's just, I love that. The mindset, I mean, that's what brought me here to hosting this podcast and stuff like that. We don't have failures, we have lessons, right? And just the older I get, the more of a believer I am on that kind of stuff. I don't know. Everything that's happened has led me here. Like, why would I change it?
And there's I think the other thing that happens is as you get older, you see the complexity of things a lot clearer. One of the things I'm very interested in studying right now, and actually taking a course over at George Mason, is polarity thinking, and kind of the fact that things are more of a both and than they are an either or. Right. And that's kind of the way life works. And my girlfriend's son, who, you know, I'm dad to him too, and I was driving around yesterday, and he says, you know, hey Mike, what's faster, a motorcycle or a car? And it's, you know, such a simple question from a 5-year-old kid, and it's like, well, I mean, typically it would be a motorcycle, but it was a racing car, you know, and so you begin to see layers of things that, you know, as you get older, like 6 years old, like, well, it's a simple, like, which is faster, just one or the other, you know. And, and as an adult, you start to live a lot more life. You start to, you know, you read a lot more. You see the way things are put together, and you see everything in a much more gray than black and white.
Right. Everything has layers.
Yep.
They're more of an onion. And especially when you're dealing with another person, right? I mean, I think when someone comes to work, or you just not even in work, right? You run into the person and they're angry about something. Well, that's landing on you, but it's not because of you, right? I was very selfish in my approach to other people, where I thought it was about me, like they were doing that to me. They were doing that, and I happened to be standing there. Right. They weren't, that reaction probably had nothing to do with me. That reaction had to do with probably 15 other things that's going on in their life, because they're a complex person. Right. Right. So we all are. Right. It's not, and being able to step back and have that pause and that thought, I think is a huge thing for any leader. Right. Or just any person when you're working in a person to person business, because you're doing business to business sales. Yeah. But you're doing it with people.
Exactly. And I in addition to InquisIT, I have an executive coaching firm, and then I'm launching another startup in January. And
you're just doing it,
trying. the biggest thing that the coaching taught me, and it's one of my favorite things to do, is really just to ask a lot of questions and understand, and because to your point, like you said, people are complex and they have a lot of their own stuff, and what people, I find, tend to actually need is not somebody to guide them, not somebody to tutor them, is really to just kind of ask a lot of questions and help them think through their own answers, because there is no way that, as good as I might be as a person in understanding others, I can't totally put my feet in their shoes.
Yeah.
And they're always going to have a better answer because they've got all of the context. The best thing that you can do is just help them open their eyes to it and, take the aperture and expand it.
Asking questions. There's a book, Negotiate Like Your Life Depends on It, right? And in there, Never Split the Difference. That was the name of it. I was trying to remember. He talks about asking how, right? And using that as an opportunity. He's talking about negotiations, and his level of negotiations are life and death. I mean, that's what he was talking about. This could be, your daughter's asking you, can I go out with my friends this weekend? And you can ask her, well, how would you do that if, and then insert whatever. Right. You're not saying no, you're just asking her to come up with an explanation. And when they work it around, they're like, well, you know what, maybe I shouldn't do that this weekend.
Maybe that doesn't make sense.
Yeah. So what else are you reading? You said you read that book?
Yeah. No, I'm actually a pretty avid reader. So, in the morning routine, as I get up and I do my cardio, I read the Wall Street Journal every morning. I'm reading right now a book, Tough Journey. It's from Pearl Harbor to Reagan, and mostly a study on globalism, which is kind of one of the things I've gotten into as of recent. Stephen Ambrose wrote another book on globalism that's really good.
What's the name of that one?
It's Globalism, and then it's got a subtitle which is totally escaping me right now. But it's 1936 to just about present time, and the whole thing behind kind of where the country's economy is today and what the history is, that, the big increase, the post-World War II components, then going into international, that speeding up through, the Reagan years and right. Everything else is very interesting. But no, the favorite, it's a favorite. That's Malcolm Gladwell is probably one of my favorite authors. Yeah. And David and Goliath is a book that I've had the last two management teams I've run actually read. For various reasons, but and the company that we're launching in January is actually called Sling Partners, quasi named after the David and Goliath using the sling. And really the underlying component of that book that I enjoy is that there are weak people can appear having weaknesses, but the reality is there is another side to that. That makes them incredibly strong, and it's really understanding that. And that, that perception of the weakness will get you if you're not careful. And obviously David Goliath, he swung the sling and, hit him in the head. And that story, it's got a biblical version and a historical version. But, some of the other things in the book are, the guy who worked with chemotherapy, he lived through huge amounts of carnage during, I think it was World War I. And it gave him essentially the stomach to work with cancer patients under the various chemical cocktails that they were giving them, and all of the side effects that had, which get a little gruesome in the book. But even though, these horrible things were happening, this guy's really unfortunate background of growing up in an absolutely war-torn city made it so that he could ultimately develop something that saved thousands, if not millions, of people's lives. And so it's a series of stories like that where, some of the other stuff talks about dyslexia in executives, and the fact that you actually become really good at delegating and understanding people because you're absent of the ability to always sit in that more, confined environment and read. So it's a lot of neat things like that I think is really, when you think about it and you apply it to a larger set, you really have to look at where people are strong. You talk about mindset, things like, fixed versus growth. Yeah. I think that there are elements of a growth mindset, like, I can be good at anything versus, I'm not good at everything. I think there's a little bit of a middle ground on some of that stuff.
Have you read Carol Dweck?
Oh yeah. And, I think so I'll take myself, for example. I am quick to make decisions. I know that I am not always into the details. Those kind of things. The fact that I now know who more appropriate people are to put around me. I have my two business partners now, Megan and Madeline, are really incredible. And what they do is we as a team balance each other out. Madeline's got a background as an attorney, so her nature is to be a bit more understanding and cautious, and it's things like that balance out the crazy guy who might make too quick of a decision. Right. And those are really powerful things when you put those together. And I think that's not that look, honestly, I'm not sure that I can ever be as good as she is about being kind of cautious or thinking through in totality. Could I get better at it? Yes, that's the growth mindset. Right. But I also have to be realistic, which is that's such a natural asset to her. Why would I bang my head against the wall to grow maybe 10% in something that she's already got as 100?
Yeah, well, you're saying that, because you're talking about how you structured a team that balances itself based on individual strengths, right?
Yes, I look at it like if she every time she steps to the plate, she's hitting at least a triple and has some home runs, and in that area I'm striking out, I can start hitting to first base. Mm-hmm. But if she's hitting triples every time,
why would you do that?
Right. I can do it for myself. It doesn't mean
that you're not good at bat, because
right.
You can get on base.
Right.
And you used to not be able to get on base, and now you can. So you've made, in that example, 100% increase. But for the unit, for the entire business, for the overall step back from the elephant.
I still have to recognize its relativity in the organization.
Yeah, yes. Talk to me about that morning routine. You wake up at the same time every day? Or
wake up around 5:30.
Okay.
Have a cup of coffee and lemon water, and straight off to the gym. Okay. I'm doing 40 minutes of cardio, which is too much for an off-season bodybuilder. And during that time, I read. I read the book on my on the Kindle app.
Do you read on you said Kindle? Is it the audio book, or are you actually scrolling?
No, I scroll through. Okay. Yep. In the morning before I head to the gym, I try to take a minute. I do just a small drink, a gratitude journal.
Yeah, so I wanted to get to that.
I do find that therapeutic. I'm not I've really wanted to get into some degree of be able to sit and meditate and things like that, and I've not gotten to that point.
Yeah, no, I'm huge on that. I'm glad you brought that up, because I was going to ask you, do you do a journal, gratitude list? I'm real big on I am statements. A couple years ago, I realized just how powerful those words are in the English language. I never even thought about that, and I would say things like I am, and then insert some pretty negative things. Especially you working out, I can say I'm a fat piece of whatever, and all these things, right? And in my mind, I think, I don't really mean it. Or I'm only talking to myself, but that's the most important person.
Yeah, we are horrible to ourselves, generally as
self-talk, and and then that it does come out with other people. When I meet someone who's overly critical, I almost want to reach out to that person even more when they're overly critical of other people, because I can only imagine what they're saying to themselves.
Yeah, exactly.
So your gratitude journal. How many things are you jotting down? I mean, how crazy do you get with it?
I've got 3 things I'm grateful for, 3 things that I want to accomplish for the day, and then usually a statement up front, and then
like an I am statement, or like an affirmation kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly, an affirmation. Yeah. And then in the evening, it's kind of the same thing. What happened during the day?
So you take inventory. Yeah, that's awesome. Where did that come about in your life? Like, where did you learn how to do that?
Yeah, so going back to 2009. One of it was probably conditions, but it didn't come out that way, was that I get an executive coach. I mean, at that point in my life, I was I don't know, 30 some odd years old, and, really had a lot of sharp edges still, as much as I had a lot of, kind of natural leadership tendency and the ability to sell, and had done, well in the company and deserved it.
And your military experience.
And military, absolutely. But, and I had taken leadership courses and things like that. But there was still a sharpness to me, probably more related to my own insecurities than anything. I was working with a guy who's a Harvard MBA, another guy who's a college professor, another guy who's at a, Bell Labs, and me. And it was like, so I had to find my edge someplace. And I spent a lot of times at Steve Gladys over at George Mason has been my executive coach for years, and he is amazing on many, many levels. But one of the things that he introduced me to pretty quickly was, the gratitude journal and some of that kind of stuff. And so I've been doing it for years, and it helps. And actually now they've got, it's an app on the phone. It takes, it's a matter of minutes. But the big thing I think for people is finding a time during the day to just slow down for yourself and start to think about what you have planned, whatever it is. The big thing is you're thinking about it in a positive way.
Yeah.
And that's what I think a lot of people miss, especially with a lot of social media and stuff like that, is that's the first thing that people want to pop into. And instead of popping into a somewhat, a positive space, or just kind of slow down and say, okay, what do I have coming up? We jump into a very polarized atmosphere, and that begins to drive things the wrong direction right from the beginning.
Yeah. So do you purposely refrain from any kind of like electronic device outside of your Kindle?
No, but I don't carry a lot of apps. I don't have Amazon on my phone. I don't have Facebook. I don't have Instagram. I don't have any of that stuff. I have LinkedIn, but all the alarms are turned off.
Yeah.
I try to monitor it that way so I can kind of control my time without
Right.
losing complete connectivity. Exactly.
Yeah, you're not going back and forth.
Exactly. And with kids, that was a tough decision, because you can use a lot of the social media to kind of watch the kids or see what they're into, or see a new friend that pops up, and a lot of that kind of stuff. And deciding not to do that was a big decision. And it was funny. I actually talked to my kids about it. And I said, I'm doing this, and it's largely for me. But I think the big thing that you guys got to realize is that even if I was sitting there monitoring you guys, it really wouldn't ultimately build you into the kind of person I want you to be. I want you to be the kind of person that doesn't need to be watched to do the right thing. And that's the ultimate trust.
Like, how have you seen your habits, your routines, your mindset, your ability to lead this company? How do you see that impacting your kids now? And are you actively trying to coach them or think about them and things like that?
I think I annoy the hell out of them.
Because how old are they?
So my oldest is 21, my youngest is 10. And my oldest actually said to me, she goes, Dad, I love talking to you, but you're really annoying. And I was like, okay, well, what makes me annoying? And she goes, well, you never give me an answer. I do that on purpose, you know that? She's like, yeah, I wish you wouldn't. Just tell me what to do. And I was like, well, that's not life, And I probably treat the kids a little more like clients at times than I probably should. But I think that coming up and maturing through the executive ranks, and having some things happen in the middle there that were pretty tough, and you learn a lot about yourself, definitely impacts the way in which you raise your kids. Because for me, I've done two things. I've realized on one hand that they have to have their own set of really good and probably really terrible experiences to turn into the people that they'll be. And my role past like middle school is really just to kind of be able to guide and coach. And it's the ethics, whether you're religious or it's just the kind of person they're going to be, and the foundation of what you want to give them as people is really done at a much younger age.
So, and then do you take that same approach in a general way with the employees in the company, like that you allow them? I mean, like,
I think it varies. There's probably three types of employees relative to the way that I would coach them. There's an employee composition that kind of needs to have clarity of guidance, and not really looking to be coached as much as they kind of need to clearly know what's expected.
Just tell me what
and
to
what
do.
they need to do, right?
Yeah.
You have a group of employees who are beginning to stretch their way out of that. So I had an employee come up yesterday. I had started to send around a bunch of things that are just coming up for the business that we're going to have to be accountable for. And I sent an email to a couple of folks. I said, hey, I want you guys to be aware of this because it's coming down the road. And, da-da-da. And the response back was, just tell me what I need to do. And I went and I chat with her supervisor and said, that's a great answer for a year ago. It's an okay answer for today, but it's not the answer for tomorrow. Because if this person wants to have a career where they're in charge of people and they're guiding and they're doing all those kind of things, the answer of just tell me what to do isn't an adequate answer. You've got to start to transition into something else. You've got to start to transition into that person that's asking the questions and doing the leading and things like that. And then you've got a group of employees who are more, generally your upper echelons, right? Senior managers, executives, VPs, other people in the C-suite who they're doing those things, and you kind of have to figure out ways to coach each other and call each other out on things they're doing.
But it sounds like employees, they go through this life cycle. They touch each one of those where they're in the stage where they need to be told what to do. They then graduate to.
I'll put it this way: they all can.
Well, that goes back to that fixed mindset, growth mindset kind of thing, right? This, I hear you have this all around sense of mentorship and an ability to communicate with people, and sounds like you've been developing that over time. Your executive coach, is that where you're getting most of that, or do you have a separate mentor?
I've had many along the way. One of my biggest mentors was probably Sasha at Facile, and it's funny because just life changes, and he's a guy who, the time that we had together, I learned a ton, and I've had a couple of people like him, like Steve, in my life at various times who, gave me some tools that I really needed to add to the toolbox at that point in my life. And I think the biggest thing from a mentorship perspective is to really listen to the folks that tell you what you probably don't want to hear, but you kind of know you need to. When I see, some of the kids, and I see this with my oldest daughter, it's really nice to have somebody that says you're fantastic. And that certainly needs to be part of the conversation. But the whole reason that you have a mentor, not the whole reason, but a lot of the reason you have a mentor is so that you have somebody who can help you pump the brakes, for example, when you're young. Or help you, shore something up that's a weak point. Say, you've, introduce you, for example, to the concept of EQ, which is not something that is ever really discussed or talked about or understood until all of a sudden you're in charge of people and people are trying to tell you about it and you're going, what the hell is this? Nobody said anything about this emotional stuff before.
I think I was almost 30 by the time I even learned that it was a thing.
I was probably well over that. And, and as I said, I was much more abrasive when I was younger. And I was just kind of going, I'm supposed to cry at work. And, we're watching, Brene Brown and vulnerability. And I'm going, what is this crap?
Are you a fan of Brene Brown?
But I get it now. It took me a little while, but I really, truly, understand. I opened some of my first management meetings with everybody telling a story like that. Because I
with vulnerability, tell me something that you're vulnerable about.
And I start the story, and but one of the management meetings I was in, I was saying I went through. I lost my mom, got divorced, and got fired all within 6 months, and ended up in a lawsuit with these guys I'm talking about that I was, that I loved, that I worked so close. I was at one of these management meetings, and all of a sudden I was like, God damn, I'm gonna cry. It took, everything to hold it back. But honestly, I think that was probably one of the better meetings because everybody looked at me, was like, if he's willing to do that, we could say anything now, that kind of thing. And it was a very, eye-opening experience for everybody to kind of go, geez, we've all had crappy stuff happen. We've all had this, stuff happen. And you learn stuff about everybody in the room. You go, oh my God, that's, you're amazing. I had no idea that happened.
You're an actual person. Right?
You get to know each other on a whole different level, which is really important. People don't understand, and I think in business especially, undervalue connection. There's a really, really, really good, I think 80-year study now at Harvard. If you Google 80-year study, Harvard connection.
Yeah, you were telling me that.
It's great. There's a TED Talk that goes with it, and it talks about really the number one thing that affects your health is actually your human connection. And if you look at statistics around why people stay at jobs and leave jobs, it's basically two things. It's your boss and how you're connected to the people around you. Having friends at work is a good thing. And you know, I'm 43, and I grew up with a lot of people telling me, you know, it's not business, it's not personal, it's just business. And you know,
see that in movies a lot.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're kind of conditioned to think that, but honestly, you know, I've talked about, you know, one of the books I write, I want to title it. It's, you know, it's not personal, it's just business. That's bullshit. Because it is, you know, and those connections, understanding who Madeline and Megan are as people so that they can complement me in some of my weakest areas is you've got to know people to make those kind of decisions. And then you've got to know people when you're making decisions that affect the insurance that's going to go to 100 people, the move that's going to be made at, you know, Exim that's going to directly affect people financing businesses for overseas trades. I mean, these are important things, and you got to know each other to make the right calls.
Yeah, it's both and. It's personal and business.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's awesome. You know, one thing you mentioned before, right, was when you were talking about, you know, in the example that you had where there was an employee that was sort of underperforming, or their response to a directive or a question was fine for a year ago, but not where they are. You actually had that discussion with their supervisor. So I think you accomplished two things in that, right? You then coached up their supervisor on how to go about coaching that individual, and then allowed that person to have that interaction with them, so they got another repetition, another experience.
Which also sends a message of trust. And that's something that gets overlooked in some of those interactions. It's very easy to go to the person, and in especially flat, more entrepreneurial businesses, you can very accidentally step on toes.
When there's not that many people.
Yep. But kind of remembering, and again, it's understanding people. This is one of Madeline's folks, and Madeline is a really great example of, like Jocko Willink, that extreme ownership. I mean, she really owns what she does. And so, if I were to have gone to that person, it would have been a message to Madeline, which is, I feel I'm going to do this better than you. That's if she would have read that. I know that about her. And so that would have been completely unfair and would have sent entirely the wrong message. So, talking to, when you're working with especially executives that really you want them to own their section, you want them to have that, you have to also respect that.
So to that, anyone listening, right, that is maybe in a technical position, or let's say that they're graduating from school and they're listening to this and they're hearing your career, and they want to make a jump, they want to make a shift either from a technical position or whatever they're doing now into a leadership role. What advice can you give them?
Yeah, the big thing is self-awareness. I think when you start to learn about yourself, then you also start to learn about others in the process, because you start to see, oh yeah, that person has that thing I'm missing, or whatever. When you're a leader, when you are in charge of an organization, in charge of a section, you're on stage. Everybody is looking at what you do. They're taking cues from the way that you do them. If you're that newly promoted person, they're going to go, oh, well, that's how I need to be to get promoted. Or if you're the CEO, they go, okay, that's the behavior that I need to emulate to get ahead in this organization. And you've got to be, I think, very aware of yourself and how you present to others in order to really then understand other people, as well as really keep in your back of your mind, like, I am on stage. These folks are looking at me for cues on how they should behave. And so I need to understand that.
Right. You may be the only example of a leader they meet that day. So,
yeah, easily.
So, act accordingly kind of thing.
Yeah, there's a great saying, which is, the culture of an organization is built on the CEO's worst behavior. And it's, it's really something you got to remember.
I ask everyone this, right? So what are some of the things, or what do you want future Mike to be proud of current Mike doing, right? Like what's he working on? And it doesn't have to be business related, right? It could be.
The first thing is all my kids turn out to be really good people, well-adjusted adults. That's number one, for me. I would like to see financial success obviously.
It's helpful. I've heard
well,
that.
And it's one of those things, it's honestly, it's one of those things that, if somebody wants to be rich, we almost look down on them.
Yeah.
And it's, well, how could you want money? And honestly, it took me a little while to come to terms with, I like the process of making money. I enjoy the competitive nature of comparing what I've done to others. And all that kind of things. And those are certain things that others look down upon. I go, that's okay. That's me. That's a part of kind of who I am.
You think that comes from playing sports as a younger, that competitive nature? And
I'm extremely competitive, yes.
Yeah, well, you're in bodybuilding competitions. You're not just working out. You're working out to compare yourself to other people and work out harder.
Yes. And I was competing in CrossFit for a little bit before this. And actually, I would say bodybuilding is funny you bring that up. I really want to have that pro bodybuilding card. That's a big accomplishment. And
I could talk to you all day.
Yeah.
I love this conversation. I think we have a lot in common. I had so many more questions for you, but look, I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with us today.
Oh, my pleasure.
Thanks for being here. Thanks for making the time. You're in the middle of your move.
Yeah.
This has been great. I look forward to having you back on.
Thanks for listening to DC Local Leaders. We'd love to connect with you. Find us on LinkedIn and YouTube by searching DC Local Leaders, on Instagram at DC Local Leaders, or our website, dclocalleaders.com. You can find the podcast on Spotify, iTunes, Google, or wherever you find great podcasts. Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe. If you're a business leader and have questions on your lease and how it impacts your business's opportunities to grow, or have questions about the market, you can reach Philip directly at philip.nathram@transwestern.com. He'd love to speak with you. Until next time.